The show you're about to listen to may contain themes of violence, occult activities, strong language, and other sensitive material. With an emphasis on cults, murder, and other adult matters, listener discretion is advised. On Cult Leader, I strive for telling stories in a truthful manner, though press, media, and other resources cannot always be verified. Sources can be found in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to Cult Leader. I'm your Cult Leader, Spencer Henry, and Cult Babes, it's not very often I find myself completely stuck when it comes to a case with multiple suspect theories. Okay, I feel like I'm usually leaning in some sort of direction, but today's case, the one we're going to talk about, is one that had me going back and forth the more that I dove into it. And usually, there's some sort of lineup. You could tell who was sketchy, who had the motive, you can follow the physical evidence, and at least you're moving in some sort of direction, right? But here, with this case, no babes. This one is like the deeper you go, the more you unravel it, the more divided everything becomes. And it's actually a bit of a hot topic I've learned in the true crime world. To this day, people have their theories. They're like, I'm right because of this. I'm right because of that. You're wrong. I don't know. People are still very much split down the middle. And I'm very, very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this episode. That being said, today we're going to try and figure out whether an unknown killer slipped in and out of a rural farmhouse without a trace, seemingly leaving no evidence behind, or instead, was it an 11-year-old boy who committed an execution-style moida? Yeah, you heard me. An 11-year-old. A child killer. Rare, but not unheard of. Not by any means. I'm a Lifetime aficionado. I'm subscribed to the network. I know there's a whole show called Killer Kids. I think that was on Lifetime. Anyway, back we go to February 20th, 2009. It started out like any other freezing winter morning in Wampum, Lawrence County, Pennsylvania. I think technically New Beaver Borough. Not 100% on pronunciations here. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the population here is around 600 people, give or take. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone. And you didn't have to lock your door. No, I don't know. People probably lock their doors. I mean, I would, because a lot of these houses are on pretty rural land. I mean, there's acres and acres of wood and open land on a lot of these people's property. Inside one of those houses, Chris Brown was running late for work. Not that Chris Brown. This Chris Brown was a stocky white guy working in shipping at a local tableware company. And his fiance, 26-year-old Kenzie Marie Hauk, was 8.5 months pregnant with a baby boy inside her belly. Also to be named Christopher. Just like his dad, in case you needed that clarification. Now, this was a blended household. Chris had an 11-year-old son from a previous relationship, Jordan, who lived with them, along with Kenzie's daughters from a prior relationship, 7-year-old Janessa and 4-year-old Adeline. By all accounts, they'd settled into a pretty nice groove in recent months. Not the Brady Bunch per se, but life was nice here. I think everyone, all of the kids in that little blended family scenario were super excited that she was pregnant with a new baby to come. That morning of February 20th, Kenzie, a hairstylist, was staying home because, she's 8.5 months pregnant, right? Who wants to be on their feet? She was asleep in a downstairs bedroom. All right, picture it. She's downstairs in the bedroom, in bed, allegedly still sleeping at the time, when around 8:15 a.m., 11-year-old Jordan and 7-year-old Janessa leave to catch the school bus. Completely normal morning, nothing unusual, no yelling, no tension. There was no fights about unfinished homework or forgetting to brush their teeth. Just kids heading out for school, probably excited to get the day over with so that they could head into the weekend. About 45 minutes later, around 9 o'clock in the morning, some tree trimmers arrived on the property for some scheduled work. And it was shortly after this that one of the maintenance workers spots 4-year-old Adeline on the porch crying. And, you know, is it a kid crying? Is something happened? He doesn't know, but he's going to check it out, right? So he goes over to this little girl. He's like, what's wrong? You know, where's your mom? And she tells him that mom's not moving. Okay. And mom wasn't moving because mom was, in fact, dead. The worker immediately calls 911. And that is when Jeffrey Martin of the Pennsylvania State Police Department arrives on scene. He's one of the first responders to the scene. And when you have a town this small, I mean, 600 people, that's pretty small. He knew, of course, who Kenzie Hauk was. He knew she was pregnant. And so when he gets the call to head over to their house and he finds her in the downstairs bedroom covered in blood, his first assumption is that there was some sort of catastrophic medical event related to the pregnancy, right? Like maybe a possible hemorrhage. He doesn't know, but that's kind of like his first working theory. They attempt CPR on Kenzie, but there is nothing that can be done. Kenzie and her unborn son gone. They were careful not to disturb anything, thinking that they were preserving a medical scene at first, when in fact, the coroner arrives shortly after. He begins examining her, and that is when the officer, Patrick Martin, hears the coroner say, we have a problem. Turns out it wasn't a hemorrhage. Kenzie had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. And in that instant, the heartbreaking situation went from freak tragic death of a pregnant woman to a highly suspicious homicide. Now, Chris was called home from work and they had to break this news to him that both his fiance and their baby that was weeks away from being born had died. He understandably fell to his knees in the yard. It didn't take long for investigators to rule him out as a suspect. I mean, as is standard in a case like this, he was brought in for questioning. His hands were swabbed for gunshot residue, but all of the results came back clean. Not only that, but he had his alibi. He had been at work that day. It was fully accounted for. He was at the factory during the estimated time of death, exactly like he said he had been. I can't imagine. I cannot imagine receiving that news, like being at that exciting place in your life and then finding something like that out. It's fucking heartbreaking. And now they're going to have to tell the kids, right? Police went to Mohawk Elementary School to interview both Jordan and Janessa. In those first interviews, both children described a normal morning. There was nothing unusual. There was no arguments in the house, no loud noises, no deceased mom covered in blood. I mean, this is a very small time window that they're working with, right? In between those kids leaving for school and her alleged murder. Jordan did mention one detail that stuck out to them. He tells them that when they left the house to board the bus, he had seen a black truck near the house. At the time, it didn't seem alarming. I mean, tree workers were expected to be in the area, and a truck in a rural town, I mean, that's not exactly suspicious, right? But by the end of that first day, things had escalated very quickly. So Jordan and Janessa were interviewed more than once, and investigators went back to them that evening, pressing for more clarity, consistency, and detail. After all, yes, they're very young, but they were the only ones, aside from 4-year-old Adeline, that were home at the time with their mom that could help fill in some blanks, make some sense of this. In high-profile cases, especially involving children, re-interviews aren't unusual because they can tend to miss some details. But what stood out with this case is how much the narrative began to shift during those later conversations. All right, this is where it gets a little strange. This is where little red flags start going off. Okay, we're sounding the alarms. And then at 3:30 a.m., just hours after Chris and Jordan had finally fallen asleep, grieving, just exhausted in that pit, there was a pounding at the door. The police were back, this time with an arrest warrant. But it wasn't for the father, Chris. It was for 11-year-old Jordan Brown. That's right, 11-year-old Jordan Brown. Taken from his house in handcuffs, transported to the state police barracks, and then to the Lawrence County Jail, an adult facility. He's a fucking 5th grader. okay? The handcuffs reportedly barely fit. The jumpsuit they gave him had to be rolled up multiple times just so that he could walk, make normal movements. It's an unsettling thing to imagine, a child in an adult jail. Within 24 hours of Kenzie Houck's death, Jordan, her 11-year-old stepson, was charged with 2 counts, first-degree murder and criminal homicide of an unborn child. Now, as you can imagine, an 11-year-old being accused of double homicide instantly became national news, right? This is a story that any of us would be like, what the fuck? Tell me more. Well, I am. That's why I'm here. But before we even get into the courtroom drama, we need to separate what investigators believed happened from what was later argued in court. We've got a whole saga. So what convinced the Pennsylvania State Police that a 5th grader had executed a pregnant woman in her sleep? Well, investigators developed a story, right? This is their little situation they pieced together. The motive? Why, of course, 11-year-old Jordan was jealous of the unborn baby. Specifically jealous that it was going to be a boy named after his own father. Was he going to be replaced? I mean, it's a tumultuous thing, okay? I'm not going to lie to you. When my mom told me that she was pregnant with my little brother, I looked my parents dead in the eyes, 10 years old. I said, I'm going to cut my leg off, right? That was my response. So yeah, I think it can be unsettling to say the least when you've been the baby or you were the only, and then all of a sudden you think you're in the clear a decade later and then your brother's born. It's okay. Love my brother. I didn't cut my leg off, but was this enough for Amoida? The jealousy. That's what they think happened. On that fateful morning of February 20th, 2009, he went upstairs. He grabbed his youth model 20-gauge shotgun that had been a Christmas gift from his father. That's a whole debate in itself. However, even if you're going to teach your 11-year-old how to shoot, good, great. I don't have anything personally against that. Maybe you want to get them into hunting, whatever. Fine. But an 11-year-old child should not readily have access to a shotgun, right? Can we all agree that's fucking insane? That your guns would not be in a gun safe. Irresponsible, in my opinion. Irresponsible parenting. I think we can all agree on that. All the gun lovers out there, I think everyone's going to be like, yeah, absolutely. Guns should be locked up from children, right? Anyway, well, I mean, locked up, period. Hello, this is Cult Leader. We've heard what happens when they're not locked up. Things get heated sometimes. But anyway, from there, investigators took that theory. They're like, all right, so Jordan, he's jealous that his mom's about to give birth to a baby boy. So he grabs a shotgun. He goes and takes a shotgun shell from a box stored in an armoire downstairs. He loads the weapon. He walks into the bedroom where his stepmother, 26-year-old Kenzie Houck, is sleeping and then fires a single shot into the back of her head. And then, according to their narrative, he returned the shotgun upstairs, wiped it clean, and left for school as if nothing had happened. That was their story. And they believed there were many factors that they discovered in their short investigation that determined this was in fact true. So let's look at what they believe supported this theory. The autopsy confirmed a single shotgun wound to the back of Kenzie's head. They found multiple firearms, including the youth shotgun, in the house. One trooper claimed that the shotgun, specifically Jordan's shotgun, smelled like it had recently been fired. They also found a spent 20-gauge shotgun shell near the driveway of the home, describing it as being in pristine condition despite the winter weather conditions outside. And last but certainly not least, there was a small amount of gunshot residue found on Jordan's clothing. Now, that does raise some suspicion. During later interviews, Janessa, again 7 at the time, reportedly stated she heard a boom that morning and saw Jordan moving the household guns before they left for school. Sets off even more red flags, right? But here's the thing. There are a lot of flaws in the forensics here. First, Jordan's hands were never tested for gunshot residue. A shooting and no residue test? It's odd, right? especially feeling like they had enough to arrest him. They're not even going to test his hands for gunshot residue. I mean, they tested Chris for gunshot residue. Why not Jordan, who they thought was guilty? Second, residue was found on his clothing, but it was minimal. The defense argued it could have transferred from a recent turkey shoot that Jordan had attended, something even the prosecution's expert admitted was possible. Third, there was no conclusive forensic proof that Jordan's shotgun was the one that was used as a murder weapon. It was the same type of weapon, but there was nothing definitive that said, yes, this was a specific gun used to kill Kenzie. And then there's the blowback issue. A close-range shotgun blast to the back of the head would typically cause blood or tissue blowback onto the shooter and the firearm. But there was no blood or tissue found on Jordan's clothing or on the shotgun that he allegedly used to kill his stepmother. And I mean, that can be microscopic, right? That could be microscopic residue. You're telling me this 11-year-old just had the wherewithal to go and completely sanitize a crime scene? I don't know. The prosecution argued that the angle of the shot combined with Kenzie's hair could have absorbed or minimized the blowback somehow. I mean, it must have been a great head of hair if it's fucking dodging bullets. That explanation has been debated ever since. But what about fingerprints? Well, Culpabes, none were actually collected from the doors or from the weapon in a way that tied anyone to the shooting. Police later explained that the crime scene had been compromised before they realized it was a homicide because multiple responders had entered under the assumption that there was some sort of medical emergency. As I mentioned, it's a small town, right? A lot of them knew Kenzie Houck was pregnant. And they had gone in, they'd attempted CPR. I mean, it was messy. There's a lot of DNA there. So they pretty much admitted that by the time it was treated as a crime scene, its integrity had already been affected. So they didn't even try. They didn't really bother to collect fingerprints. And another major issue centered on the police interviews. Department policy required initial interviews all be recorded. But the first interviews with 11-year-old Jordan Brown and 7-year-old Janessa were not recorded. Only the later interviews, after details had already evolved and the story had started spinning. I mean, again, with kids, I think back to episodes where we've talked about like recovered memory therapy, like were they giving them specific information that they're like, oh yeah, maybe that did happen. Even if they didn't see a car, what if they were like, did you happen to notice a car anywhere? Did you see a car today? Yeah. Oh yeah, maybe I did. You know, it's that convincing way of thinking. The defense talked about the interviews and they argued that this opened the door to suggestion or unintentional coaching, particularly with 7-year-old Janessa. And here's where the case becomes even trickier. Under Pennsylvania law at the time, homicide charges were automatically filed in adult court regardless of age. That meant, yeah, even a defendant like Jordan Brown, if the defendant's under the age of 15, tried as an adult, they could face life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. I mean, that is a long time when you are 11 years old. So right now, it was looking like Jordan's options were either decades behind bars or a complete exoneration. There was no middle ground, right? Like, you've got a huge divide here where some people are like, well, yeah, it makes sense. He was one of the last ones in the house. His little sister said she saw him moving guns, but was that a real memory or was that a forced memory? The judge on the case, Dominic Motto, who was the first judge, I should say, assigned to the case, denied a request to transfer it to juvenile court. And his reasoning was Jordan's refusal to admit his involvement. He said that was evidence of a lack of remorse. That feels like a crazy reason to me, right? Lawyer cult babes, correct me if I'm wrong, but what the fuck, right? That makes no sense to me. If he's claiming he didn't do it, the Pennsylvania Superior Court agreed it was crazy. They later ruled that this reasoning actually violated Jordan's Fifth Amendment rights since refusing to confess cannot legally be held against a defendant. So Judge Motto, he recuses himself from this case, and the case is then reassigned to another judge named Judge John Hodge, who granted the transfer to juvenile court. He also ordered the proceedings closed to the public. Jordan, however, remained in custody pending trial. I mean, this kid, his life went from being a carefree fifth grader to complete confinement. How do you get over a trauma like that? He was initially held at the Edmund L. Thomas Adolescent Center in Erie County and later was transferred to George Junior Republic. Inside detention, Jordan tried to build a routine. He read fantasy novels obsessively. He kept a dictionary beside him to learn unfamiliar words. He even taught himself how to play guitar. He played basketball, went to classes. He was growing up behind locked doors. Literally went from childhood into teen years, waiting for the trial to begin. All the while, the question remained unresolved. Did investigators solve a shocking case in record time, or did they just lock onto the closest explanation and stop looking? Well, there's another theory that I have yet to share. Let's talk about an alternate suspect. His name, Adam Harvey. Now, Adam had been in a relationship with Kenzie for 6 years. This was not a casual fling. 6 years. Long enough to have children together, long enough to build history together, resentment, emotional baggage. By the time February 2009 had rolled around, when Kenzie was murdered, she had already filed a protection from abuse order against him. Yeah. And in that filing, her reasoning was that she alleged there was a lot of threatening behavior and prior violent incidents. She told authorities that her ex had left messages threatening to harm her and her family. Now, if you ask me, that alone should have made him a prime suspect in a domestic homicide. A protective custody order. I mean, yeah, a restraining order. I'm going to assume that he may have played some part in this violent murder. And then there was the child support issue. For years, Adam believed he was the biological father of Kenzie's youngest daughter, Adeline. But shortly before Kenzie's death, he had actually received paternity results confirming that 4-year-old Adeline was not his child. Adam, you are not the father. And this was, of course, an emotional bombshell for Adam, right? It was also a financial one, and he didn't want to pay anymore. He's like, that's not my kid. I'm not paying. And according to reports, the situation had caused a lot of arguments. As you can imagine, I think any parent, any father would be upset to find out that the mother of his child was maybe not being faithful. I mean, I don't know the logistics here. I don't know what that looked like for their relationship. Now, layer in the odd timing of his behavior. I mean, the night before the murder, Adam reportedly had a public argument with Kenzie's family at a restaurant. Okay? Witnesses have allegedly said it was intense. And within hours, Kenzie is dead. And wait, there's the truck, right? Okay. Remember, 11-year-old Jordan, he had told police that he saw a black truck near the house that morning. Guess who drove a black truck? That's right. Kenzie Houck's ex, Adam, happened to drive a black truck. Look at all the suspicious boxes that could be checked off, right? We've got a history of threats. We've got a protective order. We've got recent humiliation over paternity, financial dispute, a public argument the night before, a black truck matching Jordan Brown's early statement. To me, I'd be like, what the fuck, you guys? Like, obviously, it was the ex. And if you're building a motive, I mean, I think one could argue that betrayal, anger, humiliation, money, all converging at once is a pretty solid list. That's a perfect storm for something like this to happen. So what did police say? Well, they tracked Adam down. They did. The same day as the murder, they tracked him down and they examined his truck. During this investigation, it had a light coating of snow on the hood. So investigators argued, oh no, if he had driven the roughly 24 miles to Kenzie's house and back that morning, the snow would have been gone. To them, that made sense. Now, I'm no forensic expert, right? Just a dumb bitch with a microphone, but I will tell you right now. I have seen cars leaving snowy Big Bear Mountain in California and end up on the freeway with snow still on the hood of their car. I live in Tennessee. We just had winter. It's not entirely implausible to me that a car could still carry some snow on the hood after a drive like that. I don't know. I don't think this theory is good enough evidence to clear someone of murder. Adam told police, I was home sleeping at the time of the shooting. And his father confirmed the alibi. Investigators tested Adam's hands for gunshot residue, completely negative. He reportedly even agreed to take a polygraph test and passed. And so within a day, he was completely cleared as a suspect. And as we know, Jordan instead was arrested. Polygraphs also aren't the end-all be-all to me, because you know what? We just did that fucking wood chipper episode, right? Where the guilty husband did it. He passed polygraphs. I mean, it's not unheard of for somebody to pass a polygraph test, especially a narcissist. I don't know. If it adds up to me, but it doesn't. And the police felt the same way because they argued that there were too many improbable coincidences that would have had to align in order to make it make sense. He would have needed to know when Chris had left for work. No, the older kids were gone. No, the door was unlocked. No, where the shotgun was stored. Arrive and leave within a very narrow time window. All without leaving tracks in the fresh snow. All before the tree trimmers arrived. But I'm like, well, yeah, but that's also not that hard to figure out. I mean, have you ever heard of stalking your ex? Happens a lot. From the investigators' perspective, that pile of assumptions was less believable than the person already inside the house, even if they were an 11-year-old child. However, obviously the defense saw this very differently. They argued the investigation into Adam was too quick, that clearing someone within hours in a case of this magnitude felt too rushed. They pointed out that Jordan mentioned a black truck before Adam was ever even publicly tied to the case. Like, don't you think that's a little strange? Don't you think that's a little bizarre? And they also questioned how firm the snow on the hood logic really was and disputed the idea that the timeline was as airtight as police claimed at the time. And again, you can't blame them for that. Was this fresh powder? Was this a thick sheet of ice? I mean, who knows? Police have stood by their stance on the case for years, though. Retired investigators have even publicly stated that they believe they arrested the right person, the right suspect. In April of 2012, more than 3 years after his arrest, Jordan Brown's case was finally heard. God, that's so crazy. I mean, crazy that he just sat there for 3 years behind bars as a child. That'll fuck you up. This was not a jury trial. It was a bench trial, meaning that the judge alone decided the outcome. And Judge John Hodge presided over 3 days of testimony. No jury, no cameras, very limited public access. The case turned on forensic analysis, timelines, and circumstantial evidence. And here's another part that still raises questions. In Janessa's statement, the one investigator said included hearing a boom and seeing Jordan with the guns. That wasn't presented at trial, at all. She didn't testify. The same account that helped justify arresting 11-year-old Jordan didn't get brought up. Despite the gaps and challenges raised by the defense, Judge Hodge found Jordan delinquent, the juvenile court equivalent of guilty, on both counts of first-degree murder and criminal homicide of an unborn child. Because it was a juvenile adjudication, the sentence structure was a little different. Jordan could be held in custody until his 21st birthday. The defense appealed immediately, and in May of 2013, the Pennsylvania Superior Court ruled that the juvenile court had committed a, quote, palpable abuse of discretion. The adjudication was vacated, so the case was sent back. But here's what didn't change. Jordan's daily life of confinement. While appellate judges refused transcripts and legal arguments, he remained in custody. And those days turned into weeks, and those weeks turned into months. The months turned into years. And during that time, Chris Brown, the dad, drove roughly 230 miles round trip nearly every day to visit his son in detention. The travel cost him his job. His finances deteriorated. The emotional toll was obvious. Like, hello, he lost his fiance and unborn son, and now his oldest son is sitting in confinement in what are arguably the most critical years of his upbringing. I mean, what a mind fuck, right? Chris has never, he stated this publicly, has never fully processed his grief over the loss of his wife and unborn child because his focus during that time was fighting to free Jordan. By 2016, after more than 7 years in detention, Jordan was released on parole at the age of 18, and he remained on probation until the age of 21. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed to review the case. In July, the justices issued a unanimous 5-0 decision and overturned Jordan Brown's conviction. Their reasoning was the evidence wasn't strong enough to legally support a guilty finding. The court said the shotgun evidence pointed just as much toward innocence as it did towards guilt. In other words, it didn't prove anything either way. And in criminal law, that matters. If the evidence doesn't clearly prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the case fails. The court concluded the prosecution simply did not prove its case. The court's final word was discharged. That one word meant the case was over. And because the trial had already happened, the Constitution's double jeopardy rule applied. Jordan Brown could not be tried again for the same charge. The conviction entirely wiped away. But the arguments didn't disappear. Years later, Adeline, who was 4 at the time of the shooting, spoke publicly as a teenager. She said she remembered hearing a gunshot, answering a phone call meant for her mom, and later finding her mom after her older siblings had already gone to school. If her memory is accurate, it would mean the shooting happened after Jordan left for the bus, which, of course, challenges the original timeline. The court, however, decided her later memories weren't reliable because she was so young at the time and many years had passed. So it's enough to hold him accountable for murder, but not to be used as evidence. I don't know, that's strange to me. Her statement did not affect the appeal. The reversal was based on a lack of evidence, not her account. In 2020, Jordan sued several state troopers in federal court, accusing them of making up evidence, pressuring a child witness, and violating his constitutional rights. I mean, I'll tell you what, I'd be fucking suing too. Sure as shit. He said the case cost him 7 years of his childhood and left him with PTSD, both of which are true. However, in December of 2024, a federal jury ruled in favor of the state troopers. Jurors concluded there was no evidence that the officers acted with malice or fabricated any evidence whatsoever. As a result, Jordan's civil lawsuit was unsuccessful. And so, the Great Divide remains. Now, what about Kenzie's family? That's what I got curious about. What do they think happened? Because, of course, Chris is going to be a little biased, right? Like, well, my son didn't do this. The Houck family does, in fact, believe 11-year-old Jordan did it. They see the Supreme Court decision as a legal technicality, not proof that he's innocent, and they've said as much in interviews. The Brown family, however, believes investigators locked onto the most obvious suspect. The only other person in the house at the time may be capable of doing something like this. They believe that the authorities didn't seriously pursue other possibilities. So to this day, the case still officially remains unsolved. I've seen and read a lot of different theories out there. I mean, there was a period of time where I'm like, well, yeah, I do think it's plausible for an 11-year-old to shoot his stepmom. You know, I do think that is an obvious answer, but sometimes the most obvious thing is the truth in a situation like this. But I don't know. I think it's very likely that the ex could have done this. I think he could have staked out the situation. I don't think it's strange that he would know her schedule. I've read theories. I mean, there's another theory. What if he knew? What if the ex knew one of the maintenance people, the landscapers working on the property, one of the tree trimmers, right? Got a heads up from him. Small town. We don't know. But what I do know is that it's time for me to wrap things up for the week. Dying to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but that's where we're going to leave it. I will see you next time. And until next time, nothing wrong with kids having fun, but they shouldn't have unsupervised access to a gun. Goodbye.